According to the World Bank, Kenya's labor force is approximately 24 million people. This accounts for about 2/3 of the population, approximate numbers. And in 2 weeks' time, the country will be marking World Labor Day, the 1st of May. So just getting to understand as an employee, as an employer, and do you really understand? Are you aware of your rights? We have Wakili Peter Simba with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Just to tell us what you really need to know on this particular conversation, and even before we actually begin, just to take a look at what you really need to know on these matters. Let's take a look at what the numbers say, as well as what the Constitution says on the same. So we begin with what the numbers say. About 19.1 million. That's the number of people employed in Kenya about 2022. That is according to Statista. Still on the same, roughly about 15.9 million worked in informal conditions in the same year, and close to 3.2 million were employed in the formal sector. So that is according to Statista. Let's take a look at what the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics says on the next slide. 2.74 million people were employed in the formal sector by 2020, and this number rose the next year, about 2.91 million people. So the share of private sector employment was about 68.3% in 2021. And this just really goes to show how much of the millions of people out there, and you watching us this morning, really factored into this. Now getting into what the Constitution actually says, we can begin with the Employment Act 2007, and Wakili will just be telling us what this really means. So it provides for the basic rights and duties in employment, employer-employee relationship, and the termination of employment. And so providing in detail the whole procedure that should be followed in the termination and dismissal of employees. You can take a look at the next. The Constitution of Kenya and what different articles would say. So I'll mention first off Article 27. Wakili will be telling us the articles on the same and just expounding on the same. Article 27 providing for the right to equality and freedom from discrimination. Can proceed to the next. Take a look at the labor relations. All right, we've taken a look at the employment. So the next should be the Labor Relations Act. Can have that. On to the next slide, basically talking about the consolidation of this act, consolidating the law relating to trade unions, employer organizations, and trade disputes, also providing for registration, regulation, management of trade unions and employer organizations. And to one particular one, quite a lengthy one really, in detail, that largely affects even in the informal sector, Wakili. The Work Injury Benefits Act. Mtu aliumizwa, but then I actually don't know what should I do on all this. As an employee who's involved in an accident resulting in the employee's disablement or death is subject to the provisions of this act and entitled to the benefits provided for under this act. And you can read on that. It continues basically for the same. But Wakili, I'll start with you for a brief introduction of your understanding on the labor rights in Kenya, and if as an employee, as employees, both of us, do we even understand there are quite a number of them, but then do we get to understand all these rights before we also listen to what other employees say out there?
Well, it's very important to understand your rights, because with an understanding you are able to pursue any form of infringement of that right. And the labor laws provide rights of employees and responsibilities of employees as well. Mm-hmm. So there is one aspect of the rights, and there is the other aspect of the responsibilities of an employee. There is also the aspect of right of an employer and the responsibilities of an employer. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the law, basically when you look at the Constitution of Kenya, Article 47, it provides for the labor, every employer, every person has a right of fair labor practices, mm-hmm. which includes the rights to have fair remunerations, a right to join and participate in activities of a trade union, even right to go on strike. And that is now the grand norm of the Constitution. Remember, Article 2 of the Constitution of Kenya states that the Constitution is the supreme law. It binds all state organs and every individual. So it binds every employer, be it the Public Service Commission, be it the county government, be it an individual employer. That Constitution binds you. And when you go to the other legislation, you see now that is the grand norm. Then it stems down to now actual laws that have been formulated by Parliament. One of such laws is the Employment Act of 2007. It provides for the rights and privileges of an employee. It also provides for the procedures of termination of an employee. And there is where there is always a problem with employers. They believe that if it is my own investment and my own place, then I can terminate you at any time. But the Constitution envisages that the termination process must be fair and must be procedural. So it could be fair, but if it's not procedural, still you could be compensated.
Right.
Then, yes.
Okay, and that is just but a few of the questions that so many people have out there, and you can always be part of this conversation. You're an employee, or you know someone who's an employee, and they are really factored into this conversation. Are you aware of your rights, or do you have any questions that you'd like Wakili to tell you today and just answer you when it comes to the labor rights that you need to know wherever you work from? 0795 045 864 is the number to call in live. But before we continue, Wakili, so I spoke to a few employees around this company just to understand, do they actually understand their labor rights? Let's listen in.
I think my rights as an employee, one, I deserve to be compensated for the extra time I'm working. Secondly, I think I also deserve an annual leave. Also, I think it's also my right to, be given 1 month notice in case maybe wananifukuza kazi. Yeah, and compensation. Yeah.
Actually, I don't know all of my rights as an employee, but among the rights, najua kwamba anytime I'm sick, the company should give me a sick leave, and maybe anytime my leave days are around, if I go request for my leave days, they just accept it and give me my leave days. Yeah, and I don't know much about the rights, but I'd love to know more. So as I look forward to learn.
The rights that I know of, maybe as a mother, when it's maternity time, I have 3 months leave. But what I really don't understand that well, it's when maybe I work during my off day, how I'm supposed to be compensated. Yeah, I think that's what is not that clear to me.
Ni Edwin Sunil, msomaji wa habari Radio 47. Mimi nazifahamu baadhi ya labor laws ama haki za mfanyakazi. Mfano, kuna haki ya kufanya kazi katika mazingira ambayo ni salama na pia ni muhimu kwa afya yako. Unajua uweze fanya kazi katika mazingira ambayo yanaweza kudhuru afya yako. Pia kuna haki ya mfano matozo katika payslip yako. Lazima yaainishwe vizuri, ujue yanakatwa vipi. Hiyo ni haki ya mfanyakazi kwamba analindwa dhidi ya kutozwa. Na pia kuna haki ya kugoma. Sijasema ndagoma, lakini mfano sasa hivi madaktari wanagoma. Ni haki ya mfanyakazi ili kuhakikisha kwamba yale matakwa yao ambayo wanataka yatekelezwe basi yanatekelezwa. Hizo ndo baadhi ya haki za mfanyakazi ambazo nazijua, japo kuna nyingi ambazo ningependa zifafanuliwe zaidi, hasa zile za ndani zaidi, kama mambo na kufanya kazi overtime, if you're supposed to be paid, for how long hiyo overtime inafaa kuwa kwa muda gani. Labda unaweza kuwa na kandamizo na haujui.
Labda unaweza kuwa na kandamizo na hujui, Wakili.
Yes.
And it's always a whole worry to a number of people who you actually tell them you do have a right to this, and they're like, for real, I mean all these years kumbe nimekuwa nikikandamizwa na sijui. Is that a reality?
Yes, most employees or most of the Kenyans as well as those who are employed formally and informally. Most of them do not understand their rights. And as I mentioned, knowledge is power. When you know, or if you know your rights, you're able to pursue them in case of any infringement. Now, when we look at the Employment Act, for example, Part 5 of the Employment Act, it provides for the basic minimum, what we would call irreducible minimum, so that if your employer provides for better terms, then we can use those of your employer, but we cannot go below what is provided for under under Part 5 of the Employment Act.
But do you need a contract for this? Because the numerous house managers watching us this morning, the house helps that we do have. So what if they didn't have a contract? Uliambiwe kuja tu kutoka nyumbani kuja utufanyie kazi for this period, mimi nitakuwa nakulipa let's say 10,000 Kenya shillings per month, or even less than that, maybe even 5,000. Si unakula hapa? Yes. And they don't have a written contract. Will they come to maybe sue or claim all this, and yet there was no written contract?
Now, to answer that question, allow me to start from Section 15 of the Employment Act.
Okay.
It is the responsibility of an employer to actually make an employee understand his or her rights. In fact, the law provides that the same should be placed in a conspicuous place that they can easily see and can easily go through and understand and even condense. That is number one. Number two, it is the responsibility of an employer to provide a contract of service to our employee or his employee.
Does it have to be a written contract that one signs?
So if you do not, it's required by law to provide that. But if you fail to provide that, then we go to the tenets of law, where there are two main forms of contract. There is the written contract and there is oral contract, which can all be enforced. All you need to do is to prove. You see, there is a rule in evidence law that he who alleges must prove. You can come and adduce evidence that I've been working for so and so for this period, and there are proofs that he has been paying me. And you can call one or two witnesses. Basically, that is something that you cannot refute. That is something that you cannot actually go renege against. So it needs not to be written, but it is advisable that it be written. If it's not written, we normally know how to frame it in instances where we are pursuing these rights on behalf of an employee who has been unprocedurally and unlawfully terminated. We just indicate that the terms of the employment were undefined, but I was getting this kind of remuneration. And it's upon now the employer to come and also give his or her case. And in this case, as I've mentioned, it is his responsibility to give you
that contract. So if he failed, then already he has reneged on his responsibility. Does this cut across in all sectors, the formal sector, one employed either the private sector or public sector, or the informal sector, which actually is a huge percentage of people? Someone has they started their own business, and then slowly by slowly they employed one or two people in there, but then they didn't really formalize it and all that. All these laws, do they cut across in all the sectors? They cut across, provided you have employed. You see, there is a difference between a contract for service and a contract of service. The contract for service, there's one which basically you are paid monthly remuneration. That qualifies to be an employment. And there are also those who are paid wages. So if you are paid wages, then maybe you could be terminated at the end of that day. For example, watu wa mjengo, or whoever part does maybe the informal type of employment where they are paid maybe per day. A day, okay.
So that relationship may end or can end at the end of that day, provided that you have been paid your wages. But if it is an employment that you are paid monthly wages, then you have the responsibility, be it an individual, government entity, county government, whichever employer it is, you must be bound, and you are bound by the terms of the Employment Act, the terms of the Constitution, the rules of natural justice. So it's not about just these big corporates. It even goes to you as an individual, with your house help, with your shamba boy at home, and with any other person.
And the biggest elephant in the room now here is you told me as employer
Yes.
to work 5 days a week. And by 12, because as the labor rights again say, is it 12 hours a day?
It should be 45 hours in a week.
Or 45 hours in a week.
Around 40
so,
yes.
okay, so it's for now for the employer to calculate
Yes.
how much. And then there's the extension. Different kind of industries have their own works. In the media industry, I'd probably be in this office by as early as maybe 4 a.m. and then I have to again maybe leave into the night. In other sectors, they'd probably have to extend for whatever reason or the other. And one of the questions that we had there was, so what happens to my free time and my extension? Am I supposed to be compensated for this? How does that go?
Number one, you see there is one rule in law that a covenant should be kept. And one of such covenants is an employment contract. Like I have said, an employment contract can only be better than that which is provided for under the Employment Act, Part 5. There are also sources of agreements such as the CBAs and any other agreement. So provided you have agreed with your employer, one thing you need to understand is that your working hours are 45 in a week. So any time that you've worked extra, the law provides that you should be compensated for that extra time. And there is a way it is calculated in law. So maybe you could compensate. There are some employers who have already have laid out procedures of claiming such finances. And it's also important to also note that, you see, there is a difference between the rights of an employee and the privileges of an employee or benefits of an employee. Benefits of an employee, for example, you'll have a golf paid. They could pay you a golf membership in a club. They could give you airtime or any other thing. But there are certain things which must be followed to the latter. One of such is the working hours of an employee. Number two is the annual leave of an employee. And annual leave should not be confused with maternity leave for female employees.
And one of the ladies there, for radio presenter, was asking the same. So what happens, in all that, the whole maternity leave, and also again, there is the paternity leave. Tell us about that.
Yes, both of them. For the paternity leave and maternity leave, the employees are employed. For maternity is 3 months, and for paternity, both of them you should be compensated. Not necessarily being compensated, you should be on leave with full pay. So it is a privilege that is in the Constitution, but you also need to take another step of notifying. The Constitution says at least 7 days before you can take that leave. And also you are able now to also be, depending also on the contractual terms between you and your employer, it could also provide for maybe a longer time or a shorter period. But one thing you must be assured of is that maternity leave is a right under the Constitution, under the labor laws, and it is not basically a privilege. It is your right that you must pursue. And whenever you, there are so many employers who have become very evasive, so that when a female employee is expectant, they would want to dismiss her because of that loss of labor at that point when they are out. You see someone else will have to be brought, would have to be brought in to take that position or to fill up that position. But you see, when such people go to court that they were terminated on that ground, one, that is an offense under the labor laws. Number two, it's a form of discrimination. And other than the unfair termination, one area that employers have really not paid a lot of attention is that aspect of discrimination. So when an employer pleads discrimination in a memorandum of claim or in a claim for unfair termination, then most courts are always very, very punitive with regards to their damages. I have seen courts give up to 1 million. So even on the grounds of sickness, you are also entitled to a sick leave. So that is something that, as I mentioned, it should not be confused with an annual leave. So that if you take a maternity leave of 3 months, you are still qualified to apply for that annual leave, which basically the basic number of days is 21 days. But again, pursuant to your agreement, it can go beyond 28 or 30 days.
All right. I final learn because of time, so that, and still on the same.
Yes.
For the dismissal,
Yes.
the one month notice of the same. So how does an employee approach this for the 1 month notice on the same? So what happens to this employee in this 1 month?
My first question, even before I answer that, why are you being dismissed in the first place? Termination must be fair. It must also be procedural. So you cannot just wake up and give me a notice of termination without giving me the reasons for termination. You can be terminated because of fair reasons. Could be you do not attend to your duties, you refuse to obey lawful commands, and you become an harasser at the workplace, you've been charged, all these things. There is one thing to commit an offense at work. There is another thing to take you through the process. So upon committing an offense, it is the duty of an employer, one, to serve you with a notice to show cause, to explain, then to institute disciplinary proceedings where you are allowed or you are required to attend such meetings with a person of your choice, could be a colleague, so that he can also witness that entire procedure. Then minutes should be taken during that process. After minutes are taken, those minutes should be signed. Then a verdict must be made with that regards. Now that is the procedural. You see, when you look at the Article 45, everyone has a right to fair administration of justice. You must be told the reason for your termination. So it's not just enough to be given a notice. The notice must be fair and the procedures must be followed. Then the other thing that I also need to point, after all this have been followed, the fairness and the procedure, you also have to be given your terminal dues. Including now, if you had not been compensated for the overtime, then this is the time that you now claim them. They should also pay you. Holiday pay should be paid at this time. If there is any salary that is unpaid, they should pay you.
Right. Yes. We have about less than a minute, by the way, to wrap it up. Your advice, as I also take a look at what Kenyans are saying, a quick advice, maybe a sentence or two, on what people really should know on the awareness of their rights.
One, just read. The laws are there. You can get an advocate to assist you, but most importantly, you can engage with your employer. Normally, it's their right, it's their responsibility to give you all those rights. So there is one notion, it's not a fight. That is something that employees should know. It is a relationship, just like a marriage and any form of relationship. So you can, you can always have sometimes employers have that such trainings to just educate the employees, like what we are doing right now, training employees on their rights and how to pursue those rights. So you see, there is the aspect of the rights and the aspect of now the activeness and like the constitution without constitutionalism. They may be there, but they are not followed. So members, the employers have to advise, train their employees on their rights and even the procedures of reporting any infringement of such rights.
Right. Real quick, just taking a look at a question of the day. Are you aware as an employee of your labor rights? Presenter Sula says, we know about the government will jail us when we demonstrate for the salary increment as doctors. Elisha Nyamoto and Naruto asked Jim. Okay. Oliver Marende, we know, but Kenya is a dictatorial country. Wow. Ben Kips, you know, but Kenya, wow, okay. Ni kama watu wamechoka na nini. Eliud, in Kenya, there are privileges, not rights. Daniel Kitanyi, they are there as much as they are not. In Kenyan context being written and enacted upon are in different world. A final one, yes, but the government has so hard-minded. And Shadrach David says, of course, but the labor union, KOTU, doesn't bother even when the employees raise their issues. My opinion is there is no labor union in Kenya. This is coming at a time when we are yet to celebrate